My name's Ryan. I'm 29, and I don't usually go around telling people how well I'm doing in life. I've always believed that if you have to brag about your success, it probably isn't real. So when my uncle made a snide comment about me over Sunday dinner, in front of everyone, I just smiled and let it slide. At least for the moment. My family has this tradition. Once a month, like clockwork, we all gather at my parents' house for a family dinner. It started out innocently enough a few years ago, just a way to stay connected. But over time, it's turned into more of a battleground of subtle jabs, passive-aggressive remarks, and the occasional not-so-subtle bragging. Especially when it comes to my cousin, Brandon. Brandon is 32, and ever since he started dabbling in real estate, the entire family acts like he's the second coming of Warren Buffett. He bought one duplex 3 years ago, got lucky with the market, flipped it, and suddenly he's the family's golden child. My uncle, his dad, is his biggest cheerleader. Every dinner turns into an episode of The Brandon Show, complete with anecdotes about his eye for good property and how young people should be more like him. I've learned to tune it out, mostly because I've been doing well on my own, just quietly. I run a small property management company that's grown steadily over the past 5 years. I started it after college with some saved-up cash, long nights, and more mistakes than I care to admit. I bought a couple of small rental units, learned the ropes the hard way, and reinvested everything. Today, I manage around 20 properties, some owned, some managed for other investors. But to my family, I'm still just Ryan, who works in housing or something. I never corrected them because, honestly, I didn't feel the need to. Until this last dinner. It was a cool evening in late October, the kind where the air has that hint of coming winter, and everyone was in the dining room, crammed around the oversized table my dad had custom-built back in the day. The usual suspects were there. My parents, Uncle Dave and Aunt Mel, Brandon's parents, my younger sister Jess, my older brother Matt, and a few cousins, including Brandon. My mom made her famous roast chicken, and the wine was flowing a bit more freely than usual, which meant the filter between thought and speech was wearing thin for a few people. About halfway through the meal, we were talking about housing prices and how rent was going up across the city. That's when Uncle Dave leaned back in his chair, glanced at me, and said with this smug little smirk, "You know, Ryan, you really ought to learn from Brandon's hustle. He's not just renting, he's building an empire." I paused mid-bite. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but something about the tone, the timing, and the way everyone else around the table chuckled and nodded really hit me differently. Like I was the family slacker, the underachiever who couldn't quite figure life out, even though I was technically more involved in real estate than Brandon had ever been. Brandon chuckled too, clearly enjoying the moment. "Yeah, man," he added, between sips of Cabernet. "You should come shadow me sometime. I could teach you a thing or two about the game." I swallowed my food slowly, placed my fork down, and forced a smile. "Thanks, Brandon. I'll keep that in mind." No one caught the edge in my voice. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. The rest of the dinner went on with more of the same. Aunt Mel started telling a story about how Brandon helped a friend get out of a bad rental deal and save them thousands. Jess rolled her eyes at me across the table. She's the only one who knows what I really do. And I just quietly finished my meal. I wasn't angry exactly. I was disappointed, frustrated, tired of biting my tongue just to keep the peace. And above all, amused. Because the thing was Brandon's newest investment property, the one he'd been bragging about all night. Yeah, I managed that building. In fact, I owned the LLC that his lease was signed under. He'd rented it a few months back, and I guess he didn't bother reading the fine print or checking the company name. He dealt with one of my property agents, not me. I never said a word because I didn't think it mattered. Until now. I didn't do anything that night. I let them have their little show, let Uncle Dave finish his rant about the new generation being too soft, and watch Brandon puff out his chest like he was on Shark Tank. But something changed in me during that dinner. A line had been crossed, not just because they didn't respect me, but because they clearly didn't even care to try. After dessert, I helped my mom clear the table while the rest of the family moved to the living room. She leaned in and whispered, "You okay, honey?" "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "Just thinking." And I was. I was thinking about how long I'd let this go on. About how I'd let them write my narrative for me. About how they treated me like a kid who never quite made it. And most importantly, I was thinking about that rental contract sitting in my office drawer with Brandon's signature on it, right under the name of my company. Because if they wanted to play the real estate game, they should have checked who was holding the board. The next family dinner came just 2 weeks later. This one wasn't at my parents' place. It was at Uncle Dave's. He'd invited everyone over to celebrate Brandon landing what he called his biggest deal yet, though no one knew what that actually meant. I only found out when my assistant forwarded me an application that morning for another lease under Brandon's name. Apparently, he was moving into a newly renovated loft we'd just acquired. The irony? It was a building I had recently purchased through one of my shell companies, Ryan Holding Group LLC. The name wasn't public-facing, and I kept it that way for a reason. I never wanted my name to be the reason I got business. I wanted my work to speak for itself. Still, seeing Brandon apply for a unit I owned, without realizing it, just made me laugh. He even tried negotiating down the rent with my agent, saying, "I've got a pretty strong portfolio. You can Google me." That night, I arrived at Uncle Dave's place around 6 p.m. The house was already buzzing with energy, kids running around, the smell of baked ziti in the air, and the low hum of football commentary from the living room TV. I brought a bottle of wine, out of habit, even though I wasn't planning on drinking. I needed a clear head for what was becoming increasingly hard to pretend wasn't personal. Brandon greeted me with a slap on the back and that same smug grin. "Hope you're hungry, man." Dad went all out. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, masking my amusement. Dinner kicked off like usual. Over-the-top compliments to Aunt Mel's cooking, awkward small talk, and way too much attention directed toward Brandon's latest move in the market. He started talking about how he found this hidden gem of a property, a loft in the industrial district with huge upside, and how he planned to rent it out to influencer types and tech brothers. The table nodded along, oohing and awing, as if he'd discovered fire. I nearly choked on my water when he said, "The guy who owns it is some company called Ryan Holdings or something. Probably some corporate stiff. I'll be honest, I'm gonna lowball them. It's overpriced." That was the moment. I looked across the table and saw my sister Jess fighting a grin. She knew. She definitely knew. Uncle Dave clinked his fork against his glass and stood up like he was giving a toast. "This right here. This is why I keep saying it. Brandon is going places. Not just thinking about success. He lives it. He's not afraid to take risks. That's the difference between people who talk and people who do." His eyes swept across the table before landing, pointedly, on me. Some of you could take a page out of his book. My mom shifted uncomfortably. My dad, always the peacemaker, cleared his throat and said, "All right, Dave. Let's not turn this into another seminar." But it was too late. Brandon leaned back and smirked. "Hey, it's just facts, Uncle Jim. I mean, look at the results." The air got tight. The table went quiet. I stared down at my plate and let the silence grow. That was the thing about my family. They didn't yell. They implied. They didn't come out and call you a failure. They just nodded when someone else did. And I realized I'd had enough. I didn't say anything right away. I let the rest of dinner pass like a slow storm. Quiet, awkward, the occasional nervous laugh. I played nice, smiled, even offered to help clear the table. But that moment, Uncle Dave's speech, Brandon's comment, the dismissive glances, it stuck with me. It had always been this way. Every milestone I hit was met with a shrug, while every minor achievement Brandon stumbled upon was met with fanfare. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a story they were telling themselves. That Brandon was the leader, and I was just the tag-along. That no matter what I did, I was always just Ryan from down the street, the kid who never quite made it out of the neighborhood mentally, even if he did financially. A week later, the escalation came. Brandon posted a photo on Instagram. Him, standing in front of my loft building, holding up a key like he'd just won the lottery. The caption? "Next venture. Think bigger." My DMs started lighting up almost immediately. Friends who knew the building recognized it and started sending me the post. One guy even messaged, "Didn't you just buy this building? What's he talking about?" That's when I started putting the plan together. See, I wasn't angry that he rented from me. Business is business. But what got to me was how my entire family, and Brandon himself, had spent the last few years acting like I was some deadbeat cousin who never got out of his own way, all while literally living under the roof I built. They wanted to keep playing the game of perception? Fine. I'd let the truth speak for itself, just not in the way they expected. I scheduled a routine inspection for the unit, something I did with all my new tenants. I personally tagged along, introduced myself as the owner of the company, and watched Brandon's face shift from smug to confused to pale in about 3 seconds. He played it off like he knew the whole time, made a few awkward jokes, but I didn't engage. I was polite. Professional. "You'll find everything in order," he said quickly, trying to sound confident. "I'm sure I will," I replied. It's always interesting meeting people who rent from us without realizing who's behind the curtain. His laugh was hollow. "Yeah, small world." I left without saying more. I wanted him to sit with that. Over the next few days, things started to shift. I got a text from Aunt Mel. "Hey honey, Brandon mentioned something about renting from you? That's so cool. You should have said something." I didn't reply. Uncle Dave followed up with a call. I let go to voicemail. His message was full of forced friendliness. "Just wanted to say we're proud of what you're doing, Ryan. We've been meaning to catch up. Maybe grab coffee sometime?" "Sure, Dave. Let's do that." Right after the decade of backhanded compliments and under-the-table jabs you handed me like Christmas gifts. But the real breaking point, the moment that flipped the entire dynamic, came the following Sunday. Family dinner again. My parents this time. Everyone was there, and the energy was strange from the start. Tense, overly polite. Like they knew something had changed but couldn't name it yet. Halfway through dinner, Jess brought it up. "So, Ryan," she said casually, "how's the rental business going?" I smiled. "Busy. We just picked up another property in the old Steel District. Renovated the lofts. Leasing out pretty fast." "Oh, isn't that where Brandon just moved?" she asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "That new loft? He said he got a great deal from some anonymous landlord." She used air quotes. Brandon stiffened. I watched his face try to stay neutral. He sipped his wine. Said nothing. Uncle Dave jumped in. "It's a good area. Brandon's got an eye for that stuff." I nodded. "He does. That's why we approved his application." A pause. A long one. Then my mom blinked. "Wait, I own the company," I said simply, taking a bite of mashed potatoes. "Brandon's renting from me." Silence. No one moved. Even the clink of cutlery had stopped. The realization hit the table like a dropped glass. Aunt Mel looked from Brandon to me and back again. My dad stifled a chuckle. Jess grinned openly. Brandon, for once in his life, looked completely speechless. And that's when Uncle Dave said something I'll never forget. "Why didn't you tell us?" Not congratulations. Not well done. Just a quiet, tense demand. Like I had somehow embarrassed them by not letting them brag about me first. I shrugged. Didn't think anyone was interested. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I cut him off, calmly. And honestly, I got tired of correcting people. You all had a story you wanted to tell. I just let you tell it. I looked at Brandon, who was now staring at his plate like it might rescue him. But just so we're clear, I added, Brandon's a tenant. One of many. And I treat all my tenants fairly, whether they know me or not. The rest of the dinner was quiet. I didn't hear from Uncle Dave for about a week after that dinner. Not a single call. No snarky texts. No backhanded comments on family group chat. Just silence. For a while, I thought maybe that moment at dinner had been enough. Maybe it had finally settled things, that they'd seen who I really was, and that I didn't need to prove myself anymore. But I should have known better. People like my uncle don't take humiliation lightly, especially not in front of an audience. Especially not when it challenges the story they've spent years building. That Brandon was the star, and the rest of us were just satellites orbiting his glow. It was Jess who tipped me off. She called one night around 10, her voice tight. "Did you check out Brandon's latest story?" I was half asleep on the couch, trying to decompress after a long day of site inspections. "No," I mumbled. "Why? Did he buy a skyscraper this time?" She didn't laugh. "You should look." So I did. The story was simple, just Brandon standing in front of a for sale sign, smiling with his arm around a realtor I vaguely recognized. But the caption hit differently. Sometimes you gotta cut ties with shady people, even if they're family. We move forward with integrity. That wasn't just vague. That was aimed. I stared at it for a long time. The comments were full of the usual supporters, people who didn't know anything about the situation and just assumed he was making bold moves. A few were clearly aimed at me, though none said my name. Things like, "Good for you, man. Don't let bitter people ride your success, and not everyone's meant to be a leader." Jess sent me a screenshot of a private group chat she was still in with a couple of our cousins. Apparently, Uncle Dave had started spreading a new version of the story. The tale now went something like this. I'd been taking advantage of Brandon, overcharging him rent, bragging about owning the building, and acting like I was better than everyone. Word got around fast, as it always does in our family. Suddenly, I was the villain in a narrative I hadn't even known existed. It got worse. A week later, one of my property management partners reached out and said a rumor had been floating around that I was difficult to work with, that I mixed personal with professional and let petty grudges affect my business. Where's this coming from? I asked him over coffee. He shrugged. Someone in your circle, maybe. Don't know. But you might want to clean it up before it gets sticky. I was stunned. I'd worked hard, really hard, to keep my name clean, to build my company from the ground up. And now, all of a sudden, people were whispering behind my back. Partners hesitated. A bank even asked to review terms on a pending property loan. I could feel it. My reputation was being quietly chipped away. And I hadn't done a thing wrong. That's what made it so infuriating. Uncle Dave never came at me directly. That wasn't his style. He didn't want to fight me. He wanted to erase me. Rewrite the narrative again. Paint me as unstable, jealous, unprofessional. Someone not worth trusting. And it started to work. Over the next month, 3 tenants broke lease early. One was a friend of Brandon's. Another was a guy who sent me an email with a snide little line at the end. No hard feelings, just going with someone more established. The third never said a word, just vanished, keys in the Dropbox. I started losing sleep. The stress piled up. Calls from lenders grew colder. My inbox filled with delays, reviews, reevaluations. Even my employees noticed. "Are you okay?" asked Maya, my lead manager, one afternoon. "You've seemed off." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to drag her into my mess. "I'm just dealing with some personal stuff," I told her. "It'll pass." But it didn't. By December, I was behind on a renovation deadline because a contractor suddenly got a better offer and walked off the job. Another property sale fell through because the buyer heard concerns about my business practices. No one said it was because of Brandon or Uncle Dave, but I wasn't stupid. I could trace the rot back to its root. And the worst part? My family believed it. Not all of them, but enough. My brother Matt stopped calling. My cousin Lily canceled a lunch we'd had planned. Even my mom started asking awkward questions. "Did something happen with Dave?" she asked me gently one night while we were putting away dishes. "He said you were under a lot of stress." I looked at her and almost laughed. "Yeah," I said, "because he's causing it." She frowned. "Honey, he's family." "No, Mom," I said quietly, "he's a parasite." That conversation didn't go over well. A few days later, I wasn't invited to Brandon's holiday party. Not that I would have gone, but still. The message was loud and clear. I was being pushed out, frozen out, painted as unstable and jealous, all because I dared to succeed on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like quitting. I'd spent 5 years building a business I was proud of. I kept it clean, ethical, efficient. I never took shortcuts. And yet, one toxic whisper campaign was enough to shake everything loose. There was a night in January, cold, bitter, one of those nights where the sky looks bruised and the world feels empty. I sat in my office staring at a spreadsheet of numbers, debts, leases, balances, and I seriously thought about selling it all. Just walking away. Let Brandon have the spotlight. Let Uncle Dave win. Let them all keep their illusion that I was the lesser one, the failure who couldn't hold it together. At least then I'd have peace. But as I sat there in the dark, staring at that glowing screen, I heard my dad's voice in my head. "If you let someone else write your story, don't be surprised when you don't like the ending." That snapped something back into place. No, I wasn't going out like that. The next morning, I got up early and started making calls. First, I reached out to every single property owner I managed for and offered them a transparent, detailed report of how their properties were performing. I reassured them, face to face if I had to, that nothing had changed. I met them at coffee shops, offices, even one guy's garage. Then I contacted every tenant who had not broken lease and offered them incentives to renew early, gift cards, maintenance perks, even small rent discounts. The feedback I got was strong. Most of them didn't even know who Brandon was, let alone care. I cleaned up my online presence, updated my business website, hired a marketing consultant to help me rebrand and reinforce my public image. I started a small podcast, nothing flashy, just me talking through common real estate pitfalls and tenant tips. It gained a small following fast, and I put Brandon's unit on special notice. No favors, no leeway, everything documented, every missed payment noted. Every late form followed up. He wasn't just a relative anymore. He was a liability. Maya noticed the change. "You're different lately," she said one afternoon. "Sharper. Focused." "I just remembered who I am," I told her. The climb back wasn't quick or easy. It was full of long nights, quiet doubts, and moments where I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But it worked. Slowly. By spring, my business was stabilizing. The tenants were happy. My partnerships were recovering. I landed a new investor from out of state, someone who found my podcast and said, "You sound like someone who's been through the fire and came out smarter." I hadn't felt proud in a long time, but I did then. And just when I thought things were calming down, Maya forwarded me a copy of an email from one of our newer tenants, a complaint about an uncomfortable interaction with Brandon. Apparently, he'd been bragging to someone in the lobby that he was the reason the building was thriving. Said he was training the owner in the business. He didn't realize the guy he was talking to was a reporter writing a piece on young entrepreneurs in real estate. Guess who the reporter contacted for a fact check? Me. And that gave me an idea. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for something better. Something public. Something they couldn't twist, erase, or pretend didn't happen. Because if Uncle Dave wanted to play the long game, if he wanted to keep rewriting the story, I was about to publish a chapter that would blow the whole narrative apart. And it all started with a phone call I made the next morning. The phone call I made that morning was to a man named Charles Kimball. He's a real estate journalist for a mid-sized regional business publication, Urban Grid. Not a national outlet, not some viral TikTok creator or clickbait blog, but an actual, respected writer with a track record of publishing deep dive features on up-and-coming developers, property management innovations, and the changing landscape of modern real estate. I'd met Charles once, a couple years ago, when he covered a story about a mixed-use development I'd helped turn around in a struggling neighborhood. He was fair, smart, and most importantly, thorough, which meant he did his homework. When I called, I wasn't planning to pitch some revenge piece or call Brandon out by name. That would have been petty and transparent. No, I was thinking much bigger. After some pleasantries, I said, "Charles, you ever think about doing a piece on the difference between flash and foundation in real estate?" He paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, guys who know how to build long-term value versus guys who just talk loud, wear watches they haven't paid off, and call themselves moguls on Instagram." He laughed. "You got someone in mind?" I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. "Maybe. But I think the real story is about how the next generation of real estate entrepreneurs is changing the game quietly, building sustainable portfolios, keeping things clean, ethical, efficient. You know, the boring stuff that actually lasts." He liked it. We scheduled a longer meeting for that Friday. In the meantime, I started preparing. The key to good revenge, real revenge, isn't about making someone suffer. It's about making the truth so undeniable, so public, and so unimpeachable that the lies just collapse under their own weight. So I started pulling receipts. I had documents, contracts, leases, signed forms. I had a trail showing 5 years of steady growth, strategic purchases, reinvestment, and tenant satisfaction. I had maintenance logs, occupancy rates, and financial statements. I even had glowing reviews from investors, tenants, and a few property owners who offered to speak on the record if needed. Brandon, from what I knew, he had 2 properties total. One he'd flipped, and another he'd rented, from me. Everything else was smoke and mirrors, built on vague social media posts, half-truths, and the backing of his father's reputation. But I didn't need to expose him directly. I just needed to contrast our paths. The day of the interview, I met Charles at a quiet cafe downtown. I wore a plain navy sweater, jeans, and a watch I'd had since college. Nothing flashy. No power move. Just me. He asked thoughtful questions. I gave thoughtful answers. We talked about the long game, about how real estate wasn't just about numbers. It was about people, about communities, about doing the right thing even when it wasn't profitable in the short term. "You've stayed pretty quiet over the years," he said toward the end. "Any reason why?" I nodded. Because I didn't need to talk. I was building. And frankly, I didn't want to be confused with the loud ones. He smiled and closed his notebook. "I think that says it all." The article was scheduled to run in 2 weeks. It wasn't going to be some viral takedown. It was going to be better. A quiet, professional profile piece that painted a picture of someone who did things the right way. Someone who built real value while others just post about it. While I waited, I kept reinforcing the groundwork. I met with a local podcast host who ran a show for young entrepreneurs. We recorded a 45-minute episode titled, From Scratch, Building Real Wealth Without Selling Your Soul. It was honest, vulnerable, and surprisingly popular. It started getting shared around LinkedIn and Reddit real estate forums. Then I contacted a friend who ran a local networking group for mid-level investors. I offered to host a free seminar on how to scale a rental portfolio ethically and sustainably. It sold out in a day. I didn't even charge. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing who I really was. Meanwhile, Brandon kept doing what Brandon does. More posts, more photo ops, more vague claims of big projects coming soon. But I noticed something. The engagement was dropping. The comments were more skeptical. One guy wrote, "Didn't you say you were buying this building months ago? Thought you were the landlord, not the tenant." Brandon deleted the comment, but the damage was there. The momentum was shifting. Quietly, I had one final move to make before the article dropped. And for that, I needed Jess. We met at a diner on the edge of town. She was already waiting with her usual iced coffee and sarcastic smirk. "I've seen that look before," she said as I sat down. "You're planning something." "Not planning. Positioning." I sipped my coffee. "I just need a favor." She leaned in, curious. "Okay, what kind of favor? You still have that group chat with the cousins?" She raised an eyebrow. "The one where half of them still think Brandon's going to be on Shark Tank any day now?" "Yeah. I want you to send them something." "Not from me, from you." "What kind of something?" I pulled out a printed copy of Brandon's rental application. His signature, my company's name, the whole thing. I had redacted the sensitive info, just enough to prove a point. I also handed her a copy of the upcoming Urban Grid article. Charles had sent me an advanced PDF before publication. Jess's eyes scanned the pages, and her grin widened with every line. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is brutal. It doesn't even say his name, but anyone who knows the family will know." I nodded. "Exactly. I'm not calling him out. I'm just letting people compare the myth to the reality." She looked at me for a long moment. "You know this won't end the way you think it will, right? Uncle Dave isn't going to back down. If anything, he'll double down. I'm counting on it." Because that was the real setup. I wasn't just trying to prove I was better. I was giving them a chance to overplay their hand. If Brandon or Uncle Dave came at me publicly after the article dropped, if they accused me of lying, bragging, whatever, it would only shine a bigger spotlight on the truth. And the truth was bulletproof. I had nothing to hide. They did. Jess sent the message 2 nights before the article went live. Just a casual, offhand comment in the group chat. "Wild how some of y'all rent from family without knowing. Even wilder how some of us build real stuff while others post about it. Anyway, check this out. Pretty cool read." Attached was the article PDF and the redacted rental doc. Brandon left the chat within the hour. Uncle Dave messaged Jess privately, saying she was being divisive. She didn't respond. The morning the article dropped, I woke up to a dozen emails and twice as many DMs. Some from tenants, some from business contacts, some from strangers. But one stood out. It was from a local investor group I'd tried to pitch 2 years ago. Back then, they passed, said I was too small. The message read, "Saw the article. We're impressed. Would love to talk again if you're still looking to expand your holdings." That same day, Maya walked into my office, her phone in hand. "You might want to see this," she said. She showed me Brandon's latest post. It was a selfie video. Shaky, nervous. No filters. "Just want to clear the air," he said. "There's been some weird stories going around. People trying to twist stuff, make themselves look good. I'm not here for drama. I'm here to build. And if you know me, you know my grind." The comments weren't kind. One read, "This feels like damage control, bro." Another, "You rent your building from your cousin and pretend you own it?" Yikes. But I didn't respond. Didn't comment. Didn't like. I just closed the app. Because the trap had been set. Brandon's shaky damage control video stayed up for about 12 hours before he deleted it. But the internet, of course, never forgets. Someone had screen recorded it and reposted it to a local entrepreneur subreddit with the title, "This guy says he's a real estate mogul. Turns out he rents from his cousin." The post exploded. Not viral by global standards, but enough to stir the pot in the city's tight-knit business scene. And the comments? Brutal. The truth was out. My name was out there now too, positively out there. That article Charles wrote kept circulating. It was respectful, grounded, and clean. It didn't gloat. It didn't take shots. It told the story of someone who stayed quiet, worked hard, and built something real. It was everything Brandon wasn't. And that contrast became impossible to ignore. The fallout started small. Whispers, mostly. A few of Brandon's business contacts pulled back. Someone posted screenshots from one of his older Instagram posts claiming he owned the loft he rented. Paired with the article, it was a direct contradiction. Even people who'd once been firmly in his corner started asking questions. Then came the first major hit. A woman named Tara, a junior realtor who had been working closely with Brandon on a potential property flip, reached out to me, tentatively, at first. She wanted to verify something. Did Brandon ever actually own the units on 6th and Baker? She asked over the phone. He told our brokerage he sold them last year, but something's not adding up. No, I replied simply. That building was never his. I've managed it since 2021. There was a long pause. Wow, she said. Okay, that explains a lot. 2 days later, I found out her firm had blacklisted Brandon from their investment partnership list for misrepresentation of ownership. He hadn't just embarrassed himself in front of our family anymore. He'd crossed into professional self-destruction. That's when Uncle Dave called. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again. I waited. Third call, I picked up. Ryan, he began. We need to talk. His voice was tight, controlled, like someone forcing calm while internally scrambling for control. I figured this was coming, I said. I don't know what you think you're doing, he continued. But this little stunt, it's gone too far. I actually laughed. A stunt? You mean the article? The one that didn't even mention Brandon by name. You know exactly what I mean. This is family. You've humiliated us. No, I corrected him. Brandon humiliated himself. I just stopped covering for him. There was silence on the other end. He finally muttered, You're going to regret this. You've made enemies in your own blood. Then maybe I should have chosen a different family, I said flatly. You made your choice when you decided to poison my name behind closed doors. I just turned on the lights. He hung up. After that, the dominoes kept falling. Brandon lost 2 speaking opportunities at small business events he'd previously been invited to. One organizer emailed me directly and apologized, saying they had been under the impression Brandon was a property developer, not a tenant. They offered me his slot. I turned it down. I wasn't interested in taking his spotlight. I just wanted my own. And I had it now. A month later, Brandon's lease came up for renewal. Standard procedure. My property manager sent him the usual 60-day notice. Instead of renewing, he moved out quietly. No goodbye, no confrontation. Just vanished one morning, his apartment left half clean, keys in the Dropbox. It was almost sad. Almost. Because that wasn't the end of it. The final blow came during the summer. A major local investor group, City Stone, was hosting a networking panel called Next General Real Estate Leaders. It was a who's who of the region's most promising developers under 35. They reached out to me in May and asked if I'd be one of the headliners. I said yes. The event was held at a sleek downtown venue. Exposed brick, pendant lights, catered cocktails, the works. I wore the same watch I'd worn since college, stood at the podium, and told my story. How I started with a duplex and a borrowed truck. How I ate ramen for months to fund a renovation. How I stayed silent while people talked over me and down to me. And how I learned that sometimes the best revenge is just letting the truth breathe. Halfway through the Q&A session, someone in the back asked, How do you deal with competitors who misrepresent themselves to get ahead? I smiled. I let them. It's easier to be loud than good. But if you're really building something real, time will sort it out for you. The room clapped. That night, I walked out of the venue and checked my phone. Another voicemail from Uncle Dave. I deleted it without listening. Another missed call from Brandon. Deleted that too. I was done. The next time I saw any of them was at my cousin Lily's wedding. I showed up with Jess, who was now working part-time for my company managing our social outreach. Brandon was already there, sitting at the far table, quiet, barely making eye contact with anyone. Uncle Dave didn't speak to me. At one point, Jess leaned over and whispered, You realize he's basically a ghost now, right? I nodded. Yeah. Does it feel as good as you thought it would? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. It feels better. Because here's the truth. I didn't want Brandon to fail. I just wanted him, and everyone else, to stop pretending I already had. He made his choice. He built a castle out of smoke and mirrors. And when the wind came, it wasn't me who knocked it down. He just never built it on solid ground. So I didn't gloat. I didn't throw it in his face. I just lived. And that, more than anything else, was the revenge. Letting the truth stand tall while the lies crumbled on their own. A few weeks later, I got a letter from a local mentorship program asking if I'd be willing to volunteer as a speaker for young entrepreneurs. I said yes, because I had nothing left to prove. I had already won, and I never even raised my voice.